Afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the launch of the Britain's Leading Edge Manifesto 2023. I'm Jonathan Warren. I'm Chief Executive of Localis, independent think tank of Place. We've had the privilege to work with colleagues from Britain's Leading Edge from its inception in 2019, where we helped launch it at the LGA conference held in Bournemouth last year. It's something that we're fully in support of in terms of making the case for the rural and coastal periphery. And very excited, very happy to have this opportunity to convene the webinar launch of this year's manifesto, which is really a call to action for narrowing rural economic and geographic disparities. And in terms of the intentionality behind today, so we've got an hour. We're going to end at 1 o'clock or just before, during which we'll have an opportunity from Matthew Barton, Head of Strategy at Cornwall Council, to outline what this year's manifesto is in terms of its ambitions and pledges and on things like investment, equality for levelling up, delivering on net zero and all that good stuff. Once Matthew's finished his overarching presentation, we're going to move into a panel debate, and great pleasure to introduce Councillor Kevin Bentley, leader of Essex County Council and chair of the Local Government Association's People and Places Board. Following Kevin, we'll have Kerry Booth, Chief Executive Designate for the Rural Services Network. And finally, we'll hear from Cornwall Council leader, Councillor Linda Taylor, setting out her views on where we are with this year's manifesto. And this is, as in Zoom webinar tradition, we will then open up for Q&As and to have an expansive dialogue with colleagues. This is being run as a Zoom webinar, so please put your questions in the Q&A box. If you're worthy of being promoted to a panelist to get your view across, I might reserve my moderator's judgment to so promote you. And that's it. That's our intention to look through Britain's Leading Edge Manifesto for 2023. So without any further ado, I'm going to put the spotlight on Matt Taylor, and I will move in Chris Ritty style. You tell me to move your slides along as and when you need me to, Matt.
I will indeed, Jonathan, and thank you for navigating the slides on my behalf. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's launch of Britain's Leading Edge new manifesto for 2023. I'm Matt Barton, Head of Strategy and Business Planning at Cornwall Council, and here in Cornwall we see firsthand the economic, social and cultural potential and challenges faced by peripheral areas of the country. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Britain's Leading Edge, of which Cornwall Council is a founder member. The group is an advocacy network of 11 predominantly rural local authorities that do not have the economic draw or magnet of a major city, but whose current and future contribution to the UK economy is as important, especially given the solutions that Britain's leading edge areas offer in addressing those fundamental challenges that we face: climate change, plus energy and food provision. I mean, essentially keeping the UK's lights on and keeping the UK population fed in the most sustainable way possible. So I'm sure that many of you are aware Britain's Leading Edge was established in 2019 with the support of our host today. So thank you to Localis. And it's basically there to provide that vital voice for rural and peripheral areas that certainly felt completely marginalised 4 years ago. So moving on, please, Jonathan. That feeling of marginalisation was due to the kind of dominance, really, of city regions within Whitehall thinking that led to the policy and funding allocations being kind of heavily weighted towards cities. that led us to identify that as a sort of a policy corridor, if you will, which has basically had been the primary focus of government's investment and other initiatives, including devolution deals back then. So that government focus on those areas within the policy corridor left places without major cities in somewhat of a policy vacuum, arguably leading to a widening divide between urban and rural places across England. And this divide, creates real differences in the lives of our residents. Per capita funding from government averages around £182 for each resident in county local authorities versus £351 for urban authorities. Large metropolitan areas also benefit from the presence of sizable community and voluntary sector organisations. They're often assumed to be kind of typical recipients of government funding, and therefore disqualifying smaller rural areas simply by definition. So as just an example to kind of illustrate that, the all-party parliamentary group on the rural powerhouse, basically identified that the £500,000 minimum threshold for the Community Renewal Fund is simply beyond the practical reach of smaller groups in rural areas. So again, meaning we have unequal access to funding. So we just go on to the next slide, please, Jonathan. So in terms of kind of what is Britain's leading edge, and so since 29, we've attempted to provide a voice to those areas often overlooked by government. Our perspective has been put forward through evidence to a range of audiences, including select committees within Westminster. We've also worked with the Treasury to ensure Green Book guidance on project appraisal and monitoring really takes account of the peripheral perspective. And also with the University of Exeter, we've jointly sponsored research from a PhD student into sustainable development in those peripheral regions. And those links with academia led to some excellent engagement at a conference we hosted on UK's regional development, again focusing on those unique advantages and disadvantages of peripheral regions. So that was the story since 2019, but clearly the government's welcome focus on levelling up and county deals, we see this now as a galvanising moment, resetting the agenda for peripheral local authorities. So we're here today launching that new manifesto, hoping to grasp the opportunity to help shape the policy narrative for our regions for years to come. So moving on to the next slide, please, Jonathan. So we all know, Britain's leading edge and those areas that are formed within that absolutely have much to offer the whole of the United Kingdom. We can power the UK. Peripheral regions of the UK are the energy powerhouses of tomorrow, if not today, with really rich natural capital, capable of producing clean, reliable, renewable energy for the entire country. So again, just to illustrate the point, in 2020, Britain's leading edge areas generated considerably more renewable energy than the rest of England. And again, crucially, as international supply problems drive higher energy prices, and while the climate crisis intensifies, we've absolutely got an opportunity here to move away from imported hydrocarbons, and Britain's leading edge, can do this. Working with the new Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, we are well placed to achieve those aims. Again, clearly, we're also the lungs of the UK. We're the custodians of large swathes of natural public space. They generate 8 times fewer carbon emissions than the rest of England, and play a crucial role in actually taking carbon out of the air. And as I said, hinted at before, we can also help feed the UK, increasing Britain's food supply chain resilience. It's even more critical in years to come as that sort of geopolitical disruption continues. So again, the UK imported 46% of its food in 2020. Britain's leading edge can level that up and make sure the country is producing more of its own food supply. So in conclusion on that slide, we absolutely have the potential to provide even more energy, more carbon storage, and more food with the right level of support. So that takes us on, Jonathan, to about how do we realise that potential and address some of those challenges also disproportionately faced by residents living within those Britain's leading edge areas. So again, our regions contain a demographic and health time bomb. Yes, our population numbers are declining. You've only got to look at the census results. Those population numbers are declining as a share of the UK's total, but the average age in those rural areas is rising faster than in cities and their surroundings. So again, just to illustrate the point, in 2020, average age in Britain's leading edge areas was 47.5 years compared to 41.7 in other English authorities. So that has implications for productivity, affordability of our social care and healthcare costs. That higher average age, also needs to be considered alongside the fact that residents of those areas are less well off than the rest of England. Gross domestic household income is just over 20,000 in Britain's leading edge areas compared to 21,500 in the rest of England. So that impact on public services, particularly adult social care, when you take that all into account, is therefore quite profound. And then again, the dispersed nature of our communities makes it harder for residents to access services and jobs, particularly again that challenge in providing public transport. So yes, whilst our employment rate is marginally higher than in Britain's leading edge areas compared to the rest of England, many of those jobs, as we know, are seasonal, insecure, low paid, which is why gross median weekly pay for workers in those Britain's leading edge areas is only £446 compared to £496 in the rest of England. So if we just move on to the next slide, and this is obviously the kind of crux of it now. So the kind of opportunities and challenges that I've just spoken about, you really give rise to our 6 manifesto commitments that we want to put before you today, as set out in that document. So as dispersed local authorities, we see partnership working as essential to convincing government to provide the meaningful support we need to improve skills, infrastructure and productivity. So together, hopefully, through this manifesto, we can commit to 6 things. First, continuing to advocate for moving focus investment beyond that policy corridor that you saw in one of the earlier slides, which still, I think to this day, is affecting much of central government policy, although it is moving in the right direction through county deals. Secondly, pressing for all parts of the UK to be truly levelled up so that rural areas perform as well as metropolitan areas, again with reference and through the prism of those 12 levelling up missions. Thirdly, helping government delivering on the promise that the UK will be net carbon zero by 2050. I know a number of Britain's leading edge members are on the cutting edge of that. Again, remembering that those areas contain that clean energy capacity, which can absolutely power this commitment. And then moving on to the final 3. So again, that first one, building UK energy and food resilience. Again, as I said earlier, even more important than ever before, given those geopolitical developments, and clearly war in Ukraine is one of many flashpoints in the world that are going to impinge on our energy supply and food imports. Fifth, advocating for fairer government research or investment in research and development, and again more money into that, improving our connectivity and the infrastructure that surrounds that, unlocking our potential for growth, again, around those three areas, around food production, clean energy, sustainable transport, and digital in terms of that connectivity. And then finally, last but not least, championing government recognition for the extra costs involved in providing the reliable, the high quality public services. So that kind of argument that we've been making perennially around fairer funding. So really pressing for that additional funding and resourcing to drive innovation and service delivery. So moving on, so what next for Britain's leading edge? So absolutely, we think categorically that more government policy could benefit from considering the kind of peripheral perspective, if you will, given that wealth of opportunity that our regions have to offer. So again, by way of illustration, the recent independent net zero review, call for places to be identified as almost like trailblaze net zero by 2030, further and faster than the government's 2050 target. So given that massive potential for clean energy generation in those Britain's leading edge areas, it's got to be the case that at least one of those places needs to be included within that list of trailblazers. We're also keen to expand our membership. At the moment, Britain's leading edge is, despite it being called Britain's leading edge, is almost is exclusively focused on England. So there's an opportunity, I think, to look at building bridges across into Wales and Scotland, and identify those kind of peripheral areas that again are without those kind of major cities that act as that economic magnet. So I think in terms of again, moving on to the next slide, please, Jonathan. So just to sort of conclude, because I'm conscious of time. So again, despite our best efforts, since 2019, it's clearly the case that kind of change that we're looking for isn't going to happen overnight. But I think, hopefully on the back of this session and other conversations that we'll be having, Britain's leading edge is absolutely determined to keep advocating for parity of treatment for what we consider as often overlooked residents and businesses across those areas. So I hope I've started to show today that we have a huge amount to offer the rest of the country. We have a huge amount to offer the government if those structural obstacles we face can be overcome, and the kind of policy vacuum is obliterated through the kind of levelling up agenda. We see more county deals coming to fruition. So in conclusion, we're absolutely keen as mustard to continue to work with partners, to collaborate on research, influence policy at those highest levels, and collectively raise our voices. Without doubt, we are absolutely stronger together. We've demonstrated that since 2019, and I'm convinced that we can go on through our manifesto launch today. And I personally look forward to hearing next from our distinguished panel. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Matt, for a very skillful exposition of this year's manifesto, and for making it all the points come across very strong indeed. And yes, on with the show. So it's great pleasure to respond on behalf of the LGA's People and Places Board, Councillor Kevin Bentley, leader of Essex County Council, which might have quite a large coastline, you were saying earlier, Kevin.
Jonathan, it does. A very long coastline. We have lots of islands. Can I say thank you? What a brilliant presentation from Matt. I've seen some of that before, but not all of it, and I was intently listening. What a brilliant presentation. What a great day it is to launch this. And just from my Essex perspective, of course, Essex could be seen as a very urban county, and in parts it is, but it's a very large county, and the vast majority of Essex is in rural areas. So everything that was being said a moment ago by Matt actually resonates hugely in the county that I'm very proud to be the leader of. But from the LGA point of view, we've really embraced this work. Matt and Linda have come to present at the People and Places Board before, and we've really embraced that work that's been taken forward. I want to really highlight a couple of things, really, especially around devolution and also skills. So skills, always very important. We always need to make sure we're providing, we are enablers of this local government, along with our educationist colleagues and also businesses as well. But our job is to make sure we're enabling those educationists to have the right resources and businesses to work with the educators to make sure they have the right resources. And it's changing, isn't it, in our changing world? There is now very much a green economy jobs skills market. It's emerging, it's new in some areas, and it will keep emerging as well. And it's not just, we talk about coastlines, offshore wind, it's much more than that, because even in offshore wind, when you have the turbines, that's the end of the story. The beginning of the story will start somewhere else in different companies that aren't necessarily by the coast, but will be within urban or even rural areas as well. And we have to make sure people are skilled in this work, that they are there. And it's not just new people, young people coming in, as important as that is, it's about an existing workforce that needs to be retrained. So retrofitting is a huge part of the skills agenda, a huge part of work we're looking at the LGA, but I know other councils are as well. Having retrofit academies to reskill people into those jobs that are required. And on the devolution side, I'm very passionate personally, and I've said this at select committees as well. While all government money is very welcomed, it has to be welcomed, especially in these straitened times. The bidding processes we seem to go for, I think, are not. If you truly believe in levelling up, then evidence is clear and evidence leads to where the money should go. If you're constantly in a bidding war, it's short term, and those who write the best bids tend to get the money. It has to be on evidence, and we in local government are the local placemakers and place shapers that have the evidence, and we need to present the evidence. Better still, rather than bidding into government, let's have proper devolution. Cornwall's really leading the way on that with its devolution deal. My own county is now talking about that in Greater Essex. Others have them as well. Others are starting that conversation. I'm again a great advocate to the local government. We don't govern for the government of the day. We govern alongside the government of the day to deliver those services. And we all know that local government is hugely respected in every survey that's taken for the services that they deliver. And the reason is we live amongst the people that, of course, we serve as well. So devolution is hugely important, and devolution will really get behind this leading edge agenda, which I think is just superb. So on green jobs, getting to net zero, everyone knows in the country, I think, that this is an issue. People sometimes will find it difficult to know how they play their part in that. And our job again in local government is to enable people to understand how they can play a part. That one very small change in your daily routine can actually make a big difference to the planet. And you hear constantly, don't you, that actually we're a very small country compared to bigger countries. What difference does it make? Well, you have to start somewhere. And once again, Britain, the leading edge here, is leading the world in this, and we will continue to do that. And that's done largely by local government, working with our partners in business, working with our partners in other public sector organisations to make that happen, and indeed working with the government as well. So I'm very proud of this leading edge work. I'm very proud that it's come to the People and Places Board. I'm very proud that the local government is taking a really big lead in this and making sure that all parts of the United Kingdom, all parts of England, certainly from our point of view, but all parts of the United Kingdom are levelled up. And it's starting with what people want, their ambitions, their beliefs, their desires, and how we can help that to do that. We only govern by permission of the public, and therefore it's very important we listen to what they want, listen to their ambitions, and help them and enable them. This work you're seeing today, the launch today, is a major milestone in that work, and I'm very delighted to support it.
Kevin, many thanks for your response and endorsement. Very much appreciated. Next, I'm going to invite Kerry Booth, Chief Exec Designate for the Rural Services Network, and very glad to see from your CV started off on the National Graduate Development Programme. I was down in Chatham seeing somebody who's just started working with Medway Council, trying to put him on the NDGP. It's some great news, Kerry.
Absolutely. That was a long time ago. I was one of the first cohorts actually that went through that process. And I was lucky enough to be placed in a local authority in West Devon. So my career at the beginning was in delivering services in a very rural local authority. So thank you for inviting me here today to comment and respond to the manifesto. As you mentioned, I'm Chief Exec Designate of the Rural Services Network. So just to explain to those of you who may not know, we're a membership organisation, a special interest group of the Local Government Association and the National Champion for Rural Services in England. And we're delighted that so many members of the Britain's Leading Edge are in membership of our organisation too. We were initially focused on local authorities, but we do recognise that public services are not really delivered in isolation. So we also have in membership over 200 service providers, from rural housing associations to health trusts, national bodies, smaller charities, all with an interest in delivering services in rural areas. And we recognise that we are stronger together, because for too long government has ignored and not listened to that rural voice, which is, as we can see from all the evidence in the manifesto, it's leaving our communities behind when you compare us to the rest of the country. So we applaud the manifesto for helping us as well as to raise that rural voice. Of the commitments in the manifesto, there's a couple that I'd just like to highlight as being particularly important for us. That's not to say the others are not, but they really stand out for us. Firstly, it's all about the money for me and fair funding. So the manifesto paints a picture of what life is like in rural areas, and it quite rightly highlights lots of areas of disadvantage, lack of affordable housing, poor public transport, digital inequality. But we know that none of those things can be tackled in isolation, and they all need attention to help our rural communities. But really, fair funding is often at the heart of lots of these things. We know that it costs more to deliver services in rural areas. The government has even recognised it costs more to deliver services in rural areas. And yet the way it funds local authorities still doesn't take into account that point. So this year in the local government finance settlement, urban authorities received 38% more in government funded spending power per head compared to rural. And as a result of years of underfunding, our rural residents are paying more in council tax. So this year, rural residents will pay on average 20% more per head than urban in council tax due to their authorities receiving less in government grants. Now, we've been working hard to influence government on this point, as I know all of the rural authorities have themselves, briefing the MPs for their head of debates, meeting with the DLEP minister to put across our points. And we were delighted that the final settlement then increased that rural services delivery grant by 10 million. But due to various other elements of the formula, that took out some of those gains for district councils, due to the funding being offset this year by the funding guarantee. And we absolutely agree with the manifesto that rural councils should be adequately compensated for delivering services that quite simply cost more. Because when you're delivering and your first call on your resources is on those statutory services, that leaves less money for discretionary spend in rural areas. We did some analysis last year. I think it's something like urban authorities have twice as much money to spend on discretionary services as those rural councils do. And that impacts, discretionary services are not just the nice to haves. That's the libraries, the public transport, the work on improving the local economy, all of those other things that are vital for keeping our economies and our communities vibrant. So we fully support the manifesto and what it's saying around fair funding. Secondly, for us, the need for levelling up. We were quite excited when we read the government's levelling up white paper. They're going to end geographical isolation and inequality. Our work is done if you read that. Unfortunately, it's not quite come out like that in what we're seeing around government policy and where they're investing funds. So the government is big on regions in levelling up. It talks about which region needs which, and it's got various metrics. So we had some analysis commissioned where we took rural as a region. How would rural fare in the government's metrics if it was a region in England? And actually it shows that rural is the region most in need of levelling up using the government's own metrics. But because it's dispersed and shared out around the country, it isn't as powerful an argument for the government to make. Councillor Bentley then talked about the bidding processes, and we've heard lots from local authorities about how unfair that is. If you're a smaller district council with less people in the team to put those bids together, you're always then at a disadvantage. I also agree that with statistics, you can tell any story really that you want, depending on how you spin that statistic. And so the government has chosen a number of metrics that it wants to measure our country on and says this is what we're going to use to level up. But when you use things like unemployment rates, we know that unemployment in rural areas is often quite low, but that's because of all the reasons that Matt talked about earlier around seasonal employment and often people taking on 2 or 3 jobs, low paid, low skilled jobs to make ends meet in those rural areas. So that gives them less opportunity for social mobility, improving their opportunities. And so actually just looking at a figure around, well, this is what we're considering employment and unemployment levels, that misses the picture in our rural areas where, because of the way our populations live, we have pockets of deprivation, sometimes pockets of deprivation next to very affluent areas, and therefore they get swallowed up and not counted in the realm of when the government is targeting support. We want government to truly level up our rural communities, to properly measure our rural communities at the right level as well, so that it can see where those discrepancies are and then target resources and take action to improve the situation. The Rural Services Network is proud to support this manifesto. I think it's great, and the more rural voices we have there, the better really, and make sure that the government starts to recognise the opportunities that our rural areas can bring, because it's not all about, oh, woe is me, we don't get as much money, we don't get, housing's more expensive, all of these things. We want to talk about all the positive elements in our rural communities and what we can contribute to the economy and to the growth of our nation. And we believe the government is missing a trick by not listening to the rural voices and not enabling us all to fulfil our full potential. So thank you.
Perry, many thanks indeed for your response. Finally, last by no means least, Linda, very good to see you again. Had the pleasure to see you in Truro a few Mondays ago. Good to see you via Zoom screen. Now, clearly so much going on in Cornwall at the moment with the Trailblazer devolution deal and all the rest of it. But we're very keen to get your kind of forward response to the manifesto before we move into Q&A. So please, over to you.
Yeah, Jonathan, and thank you for the welcome. So I'm really pleased to be here today as Britain's Leading Edge launches its second manifesto. So the local authority that I lead, which is Cornwall Council, was a founder member of the organisation, and I'm particularly pleased to hear about what Britain's Leading Edge has accomplished so far, but I'm probably more excited about what comes next. So as Matt's explained, everyone attending today is all very familiar with the economic and social challenges that remain stark for peripheral rural areas. So without the economic pull of major cities, we miss out all too often on opportunities and benefits enjoyed by more major central parts of the UK. But I am encouraged by a new sense of possibility within Britain's Leading Edge too. And we've been speaking up for places often overlooked by government. We've put forward our distinctive perspective through evidence to select committees, and we have produced our original research. We've worked closely with government departments to raise awareness of our rural requirements, and I believe that we are shifting government's attention from its historical focus on large urban areas. And this can be seen by some of Britain's Leading Edge members, including my own area, Cornwall, being amongst the first to be invited to negotiate a devolution deal with government. As we heard in the presentation earlier, local authorities at the edges of the country have a great deal to offer. So to take just one example, everyone has been affected by the staggering rises in energy price cap and energy support payments that have been made through government intervention to households. So the more domestic energy that can be produced, the more prices can be kept down. But this must be done in a way that does not harm our environment. Peripheral regions' capacity for clean energy generation is still largely untapped, and we want to work with the new Department for Energy Security and Net Zero to help power the UK. The manifesto sets out what Britain's Leading Edge can offer in terms of clean energy production, natural carbon storage, and a greater volume of food production if we receive the investment and powers to overcome the challenges we face. And those challenges for peripheral places are very real. To take the local authority that I lead, Cornwall as an example, too many jobs are still low paid and seasonal, with 73% of jobs paid below the National Living Wage Foundation. And too many children need to use food banks. The number of Trust food parcels going to children in Cornwall rose from 6,000 in 2019 to more than 9,000 in 2022, as the national cost of living emergency hit really hard. We also have a housing crisis in Cornwall, with average prices in 2021 almost 11 times higher than the national average earnings. For England as a whole, house prices were 9 times higher than average earnings. Cornwall is not unique in facing those challenges, and issues of these kinds are seen throughout the country. But peripheral parts of the UK have added burdens not faced elsewhere. Our populations are older and in worse health than in the rest of the country, and the dispersed nature of rural communities and healthcare provision makes it harder to access treatment, compounded by poor availability of public transport. Only 14% of disadvantaged young people in remote or coastal areas go to university, contrasting with 27% in urban social mobility hotspot. These factors and so many more contribute to the lower productivity currently found in Britain's leading edge regions. However, despite these challenges, I believe that renewed government focus on levelling up provides a source of hope, and the manifesto commitments set out today give a clear set of priorities to guide the work of Britain's leading edge in the years to come. I know that the challenges will not happen overnight, but we must keep advocating for parity of treatment from our often overlooked residents and businesses, and we have so much to offer. Now, this is not part of my script, but I think we all saw the challenges on the television this morning about food security and how so many supermarkets are now starting to ration their in particular tomatoes. Now, I'm not saying Cornwall and our rural edges have a glut of tomatoes, but we have absolutely got the capacity to have more investment into our agriculture and absolutely delivering on what this country needs. And my favourite phrase is that I believe Cornwall has got the resources to turbocharge not just Cornwall, but together as leading edge authorities, we can turbocharge the economy for the UK. Thank you, Jonathan.
Linda, thank you very much indeed. And you've got a piece in the MJ today, haven't you, making the
yes,
the case for the BLE. And really want to take in terms of food security, we could go on an entire another angle there. Yes, we have no tomatoes, but what I mainly took note from your what you had to say and what Matt earlier, and in terms of that parity of treatment, which rural and coastal areas need, but you don't have the magnetic pull of a major urban centre. You don't have is it true in your kind of BLE areas there isn't a sort of town with a greater population of much more than say 10,000?
But yeah, that's correct, Jonathan, and I think I'm not going to be speaking alone when I say that we absolutely need, when you're talking to businesses, they've got two big concerns, and that's one on what Kevin has spent some time talking about, and that's skills, and then it's infrastructure. Two real big major concerns. And, we need that investment, certainly into our infrastructure to make mobility much easier. But skills are a real big issue to have that focused investment so that we can deliver on, our green economy. Thank you.
Well, look, we've got sort of time for questions and answers, debate amongst the panel. So please, if you can, lob your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. We can fish them out. But really, as moderator, it's my privilege to throw one out to you. Just going back to that parity of treatment. Clearly, levelling up is as much around pride in place, quality of public realm. And you do have, do panelists have any views about, in terms of partnership working with government, health, local economic anchors, how what the biggest priority is, whether it's dealing with public service issues and the extra costs of sparsity, or that economic infrastructure, and allied with that, what Kevin was majoring on, and skills. How are we going to get that parity of treatment soonest? Any thoughts?
If I may come in, John.
Yes.
So, I mean, for me, it's about everyone having the ability to understand their own talents. I use the expression continually. In Essex, we did our own levelling up white paper long before the original one came out, and very different to the government's white paper, because we're talking about ambition. So a phrase I use continually is everyone should have the opportunity to reach for the stars. It doesn't actually matter whether they touch them, it's having the opportunity, everyone having the same opportunity and understanding what the opportunity is. So one of the greatest parts about levelling up is getting to everyone of all ages and making sure they understand what they can achieve if they wish to achieve it. You can't tell people what to do and you can't force people to do anything, but you need to present the opportunity to them. And I think a large part of what this launch is today talks about that. It's about giving people the opportunity, whether they come from urban or rural parts of the country, whether they're from peripheral parts of the country or not. Everyone is equal, everyone has the same opportunity. And that's our job as local government and as politicians and as officers to make sure we enable that through our anchor partners in business, through our anchor partners in the public sector, and throughout the health service as well. This is about the public sector working together, which we do by and large, but it could always be better and improved. This launch today starts that work in particular areas, but explain to folk, explain to people, you have a chance to achieve whatever you wish to achieve. And our job is to help you, not stand in your way, not tell you what to do, but to help you. And I think that's what today is really all about.
Many thanks, Kevin. Anyone else want to come in from the panelists on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Follow. Oh, sorry, Kerry.
It's all right. You go first. You're on screen. Go
well,
for it.
Just following on from what Kevin has said. There's opportunity out there for everyone, but not everyone has the equal opportunity to take advantage of those opportunities. And what we want to do as, part of Leading Edge in this manifesto is enforce the fact that because we are in our periphery regions, we deserve and need as much opportunity that is made available to the people who live in the cities. And I think the fact that I've highlighted about the opportunity within Cornwall for those who go to university, that is a very stark contrast. And the point that following on from what Kevin said about public realm, I heard our new chief constable quote something quite recently, and it stayed with me because he said, if it's a problem for our residents, it's a problem for me. And those words will stay with me because we need to be listening as well to what our residents are saying. If they've got a problem, let's engage with them, make sure that we have that real joined up partnership and encompass what we want to achieve with everybody within our community. We can't do this in isolation. So yes, and I think by working together, you do absolutely help build up that pride in place and help set aspirations to what we can do better, but definitely joined up community working. And going back to, I'm quoting Kevin a lot here today, the point he made is that, we shouldn't be in a bidding war. We should have a better system of devolving money down to the areas that absolutely need it to meet the objective that the government have set, which is levelling up. And until we get a better playing field on funding allocation, we will be having this conversation next year. Thank you.
Many thanks, Linda. Kerry, let's hear from you.
Yeah, just a couple of points on that bidding. I know that I think it was the Towns Fund where the government said it was going to prioritise towns with a population of over 15,000 in those that are actually then awarded funds for. Well, we know that our rural towns may be smaller than that, but they serve a huge hinterland. So actually they hit those figures and beyond, but then they weren't prioritised. And actually they do exactly the same function as a larger town in an urban area. So the way the government is going about things at the moment is disadvantaging our rural areas. Just 2 points I wanted to make. We did some research looking at the Green Book process and the way that the government funds projects for infrastructure, and actually rural is always being disadvantaged in terms of how much is spent in rural areas compared to urban. And some of that is the way that they judge projects and measure things. Everybody wants to get the most for their money, but you're not going to get true value for money in terms of how many people you're hitting in a rural area, because the population is smaller, and therefore they need to measure projects in a different way to make sure that rural is not always missing out, because those projects are just as important to those rural communities, so that they're not left behind. In terms of, for me, the big thing for government at the moment is getting them to really understand our rural areas. I think they develop policy that they think fits all, and it doesn't fit all. It's not nuanced for our rural areas. I did some work with Jonathan last year looking at off-gas grid premises. I always get those words in the wrong order. You know, the government has these policies that everybody who's off the gas grid is going to move to heat pump boiler much earlier than everybody else. Well, that disadvantages rural communities, because most of those properties are found in rural communities. Those homes are often not energy efficient, and it takes a lot of investment by the homeowner to make them energy efficient so that that heating system can work. So they have these grand aspirations in government about what they want to do and policy, without understanding, well, what that does is really disadvantage our rural communities who've been hit by the cost of living crisis much more than those in our urban areas. So for me, the important thing, in addition to all of the working together, is some way of getting government to really understand what's happening in our rural communities and measuring things at the right level and having the right measures in place so that policy isn't just a one size fits all, but is appropriate to our local area.
Many thanks indeed for those points, Kerry. Yes, rural heating is a good example. When working in the LGA, the cliche I always dreaded was one size doesn't fit all. But you come to where the rubber hits the road in policy in rural areas, and you can't say anything but that, can you? Great. Matt, can I bring you in a second? Got one question pertinent to you now. Had the census last year. Just out of curiosity, Joni Willett asked, how has post-COVID rural relocations or transmigrations impacted on population growth or decline in rural areas? Has there been any significant inward migration? Is it something you're aware of as a UK-wide phenomenon?
It is difficult and perhaps too early to say conclusively. I mean, as you said, the 2021 census was carried out only 12 months after the start of the pandemic, so it didn't really evidence what we anecdotally thought was happening in terms of, you know, an element of inward migration as people, you know, kind of escape from the cities to areas which presumably they thought was safer, and to a degree there was an element of truth in that. I mean, clearly house prices escalated, as the leader, Councillor Taylor, mentioned earlier, and that made some of the housing challenges that we were already facing, you know, clearly more acute. However, the increase in interest rates has started to slow that escalation, both in terms of house prices and, crucially, rents, which was definitely one of the issues that we were facing in 2021. So if there was an impact following the pandemic, it may well have been short-lived and partly as a result of other factors, mainly fiscal related, but that in its own right has created other challenges in terms of cost of living crisis, etc. So in a nutshell, it probably is difficult at this stage to really understand if there was any sort of medium to long-term impact of kind of population shifting from cities to kind of rural areas as a result of the pandemic. But kind of, I think in the kind of short term, you know, clearly from that escalation in house prices, there was clearly a degree of that happening, but to what degree, difficult to say.
Many thanks, Matthew. Two related questions, which are, Lynn, do you want to come in?
Well, I just wanted to add to what Matt was saying, because it's going to be interesting to find out what happened, and it's the real seaside hotspots that absolutely saw, you know, those house prices rise. But one of the things that I'm going to want to see data to substantiate what I'm about to say is that we're getting the impression that people have chosen to relocate out of cities to more rural areas and then have chosen to take themselves out of the employment market. Now, that will be interesting to see if that is correct, but it will actually put the emphasis on why we absolutely need to have better investment into skills with the existing population that is wanting to work. And I'm sensing that this could be a problem through a lot of our leading edge areas, because they are beautiful, everybody, including, you know, where Kevin's sitting. And so I think that will be interesting, but I think that could be an absolute incentive to perhaps have that investment to get those people perhaps who have chosen to retire and take them outside of the employment market, to get some investment into trying to encourage them back. But more importantly, that investment into skills with the existing employment market that we've got, that importance of upskilling. Thanks, Jonathan.
Many thanks, Linda. Give the opportunity for any panelists to respond to any of those further points from Linda before we move on.
I think anecdotally we've heard as well is not necessarily around people moving to rural areas, but around the switch in properties for them then becoming holiday lets and coming out of the rental market. And that has a big impact in terms of where people can actually live. It means that people who are on lower wages, who are in the rental market, so people who are delivering social care services, teachers, nurses, all of these kind of people, actually can't find anywhere to rent to live. I think in Cornwall, I did a presentation of something and looked, and there was something like on Rightmove, I don't know, 30 houses available in the whole of Cornwall to rent. But if I went on Airbnb, there was around 30,000 properties where I could have a week holiday. And Cornwall's not the only area where that has become an issue, and it seems to have been exacerbated since COVID as well, where we want to encourage people to holiday in this country, but the difficulty is when houses come out of the rental market, that has longer term implications for those communities around, you know, year-long residents who are there to service the shops, the schools, all of those kind of things. So that's a particular issue, anecdotally, that we're seeing.
I think the question is whether that was short-lived. Not, you know, let's not forget that people couldn't actually go abroad in that first sort of, you know, kind of couple of years. So absolutely, we did see that an escalation of rent prices, the switch from short-term lets to holiday lets. But you know, that starting kind of, and again anecdotally, it feels like it's smoothed out again, and the kind of situation is sort of normalizing back to where it was. There's clearly some, you know, short-term you know, opportunism that was inevitably taken. But yeah, so I think what it points to one of the kind of challenges that we've got, and one of the things that we need to do as a collective is try to improve our kind of data, our research across these areas to really evidence what, again, we think anecdote by anecdote has happened. And that's one of the areas and the sort of margins of the manifesto that we want to strengthen.
Many thanks, Matt. Well, we're in sort of final straight now. Question for yourself, while I've got you, or Linda, from Helen Wright. Now, she says, BLE is a great initiative. How do we go about extending the membership, and how many local authorities in England would qualify? And similarly, we've got a question from Natalie Prudet, who asks, given the connections between English and Welsh rural communities, how are the WLGA aware of your work, given strong connections between specifically Cornwall and Wales, and maybe obviously Union back in the news with the issues north of the border with Nicola Sturgeon's political career in the last week. How do you think you might extend the BLE to a sort of pan-British initiative?
Well, we've already reached out to Pembrokeshire, and I think they are keen to sort of join the throng. Perhaps fewer overtures have been made north of the border, but again, one of the things that we've kind of contemplated is, you know, do we kind of join forces, link up with the New Islands partnership that the government formed within the Levelling Up white paper, Obviously, we've got some members already in the Islands Partnership who are members of Britain's Leading Edge, Council of the Isles of Scilly, Council of the Isle of Wight, but clearly that Islands Partnership brings into play other parts of the UK. So that might be something that we give consideration to. I'm sure the leader would mention that we have actually got some really strong ties with the Welsh Government, and that extends to the LGA in Wales as well. So hopefully we can capitalise on the maturing relationship that we have with some of our Celtic cousins. And then in terms of membership within England, we have got there is a criteria that we might want to revisit around membership, and it's generally those areas that, yes, have cities, but they have a daytime population under 45,000. So, if we're sensing that we're gaining momentum and there are other areas in other local authorities in England that that would want to join the kind of flock, then we're not going to turn around and say no because your population is slightly over 45,000. So I think there'll be a degree of flex that we can accommodate in order to increase our membership.
Many thanks, Matthew. Well, we're coming into the very final straight now. What I intend to do is ask our panelists if they've got any sort of final concluding remarks before we wrap up today's session and conclude. Any start with you, Kevin. Any sort of final thoughts and conclusion to what we've debated today, what we've understood?
Well, I think today's been a great launch. It's been a great opportunity for people to listen and have their views. Now we need to evangelise this work, don't we? And already great to hear comments about people wanting to get involved. This is almost a never-ending story. It's evolving all the time. We must make sure that we are handing on to our successes some great results from this that they can take on and develop in the future. There will always be rural areas, there will always be urban areas, making sure both work in harmony and making sure the current generation and the next generation, but also importantly, the generation that hasn't been born yet has the equal opportunity that we talked about so much earlier. So I'm really thrilled by today, but today is just the start and it's a never-ending story.
Many thanks indeed, Kevin. We will keep reaching for the stars. Kerry, please, any sort of summary conclusions from yourself, please?
I think just making sure that we're all raising the rural voice and getting it out there. To me, I mean, we've been working in this arena for quite a while, which is also quite frustrating because we want to make progress for our rural areas and for government really to listen. But it does feel like over the last 12, 18 months, we had so many changes of Prime Minister, of Cabinet, and actually in the coming couple of years, we don't quite know what's going to happen around the government, whether we'll actually have a full change of government in the next election, what's going to be happening. So now, for me, the opportune time is for rural to come forward and say, hang on, we want to be considered in this process, we want policies that suit us, and we don't want to be left behind. So having the manifesto is a great kind of platform on which to move forward, and making sure that that rural voice is really heard in the next 12 months, I think for us is going to be really important.
Many thanks indeed, Kerry, for all you've had to say today. And Linda, the final word is with you, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what we've spoken about today, it will not be new. It will echo and resonate through everybody who's listening in on this conversation. And so for me, I do think there's an opportunity because outside factors will and should make government look towards the leading edge authorities. And I'm talking about food security, and I'm talking about delivery of clean, green energy. But we need to make sure our voices are heard. We need to be very vocal. We need to engage with our MPs. And as Kevin has said, this is about laying the foundations for our future, getting our own environment, our own communities right, so that everyone has a balanced opportunity to achieve what they want to achieve, regardless of what part of the UK they live in. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed. And that's show over, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone for contributing so richly to the manifesto launch. Matthew, Kevin, Perry and Linda. Thanks everyone for participating in the webinar, for throwing questions. You mentioned food security. I think it's time for us all individually to take care of our own food security and get some lunch, unless it's another screen grab. So look, thank you everyone on behalf of the car list.